Hello, everyone. This is David Haley on our next episode of the Countalytics podcast, Count It Up. Today, has our pleasure to have one of the MDs of the Hayward Partnership, Mr. Robert Shepard, out of the UK.
Right.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
How you doing today?
Very good. Difficult times, but as always in the aviation industry, we've always faced difficult times. There's never been good times that I remember.
Right.
So you just have to hunker down and do your thing and keep going. But it's certainly probably for the industry the most challenging time ever that I can remember of being nearly involved for as part of 40 years.
Yeah. So you talk about that, and so being in the aviation industry for 40 years, how'd you get started? How'd you get started in aviation?
Well, I've told very few people this. What happened was I finished at college, and I had an outplacement in my second year. You have to do an outplacement during the summer. So I went to work for an aviation caterer in the northwest of England, which is the second biggest airport for two-runway airport in the UK, called Manchester. And I'd worked for them on a job, just doing various jobs as you do in my second year at college for about 4 or 5 months. And they said to me when I finished and went back to college for my final third year, they said, if you ever want a job, you can give us a call. And you always think, yeah, sure. So I did. As like all students, I got to the end of the third year and I thought, right, what am I going to do now? And I did hotel and catering administration and management. So it wasn't sort of catering, it was hotel and catering. But I'd had some time in a hotel and I decided it wasn't for me. So I rang the guys up at Manchester Airport and I said, hi, this is Robert Shepard. You said if you ever needed a job when you finished college, and I said, and they said, Robert who? No, they. So they said, well, I tell you what, we'll talk to the senior management and call you back. And I thought, well, that'll be the last I heard of them. And then they called me back the next day and said, we've got a real problem with one of our airline clients. And it was cool. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Air 2000, or it was one of the big charters that they were doing at the time. And I said, what's the problem? I'm just like a boy out of college. But they knew me because they'd worked with me the year before. And they said, well, effectively, amazingly, it was an inventory problem.
Okay.
So I said, so what's the problem? And they said, on the melamine dishes on the tray, the small dishes, which we call the puppy dishes, and the bigger dishes were the main cold meal one, we call those the dog dishes. So the dog dishes, the puppy dishes, they were just disappearing. And they were melamine, and they were meant to be rotable. So they came back from, like cans, and you wash them and use them again. And they were losing thousands and thousands. And they said, your job is to spend all summer and track and find out where all this inventory is going. So I said, oh, okay, that shouldn't be an issue. And they said, before you say that, we've had all the guys on it here who do other jobs in the building, and they haven't been able to find it. And we're under threat from the airline. If we don't sort it out, they're going to take the contract away.
Wow.
So that was it. So that was my sort of real job after, it was really a summer job after college. And so I helped them find the inventory. You counted them out, and it's like soldiers, and you counted them back in, and it just went missing. And then one of the things I did, I toured around the airport offices and I went around there, and guess what? It was in the days where everybody smoked. They were all being used as ashtrays there. So there was an answer to some of them, but nowhere near there's much inventory that was going. And then we found some in the seat backs on the aircraft, where they hadn't put them back on the tray. But one of the big things they were using them for, which was, I can't remember, I think it was the flight attendants told us, oh yeah, the mothers always say when they go on this holiday, when they're going on the 2-hour vacation flight, yeah, they always take the dishes, because when they're on the beach with the kids, they put their cheese and their crackers and things in them in the hotel, and they always take them to the beach. And that's where the majority of them going. So that was my start in inventory. Bizarrely, that was how I got a job, from missed inventory. So there you go.
That's funny. That's
I only thought
hilarious.
of that. I only thought of that today. Bizarre, but that's what happened. And then after that, I went off and did other things. So I went off to run a wine bar restaurant as assistant manager, then manager, and then I bought into my family helped me buy into a family business of a fresh pasta business. So we had fresh pasta, and we also had a restaurant, and we had a delicatessen. And then in '87,
I'm sure there was no plate issues, inventory issues at your family business.
No, it wasn't so bad, but I had problems because my partner was always stealing from the business. So it's very difficult to tell your partner that, that is not for your house. That bottle of house wine is not for your house. That's for the business.
Right.
And it means it'll affect our gross profit. And she was a very robust, aggressive lady. And she'd started the business and I'd only bought into it. So it was a very difficult dynamic. But the final time I caught her was that she had got the butcher to deliver 10 pounds of mince, and she wasn't in the restaurant. And I took the delivery, and the delivery note said 10 pounds of mince. And actually it was a whole rack of lamb.
Oh.
So she told the butcher to write, because we only used mince for bolognese, but we didn't use rack of lamb in a pasta restaurant. So there you go. Some more inventory problems early on. And then I, after that, went back to flight catering from '87 until 2014. So that's a long time.
Wow, you have a very interesting story, especially always being in some kind of inventory problem. I guess that's one of the reasons we started Countalytics, right? Because we know so many times, regardless of what the business is, there is, if you deal with any kind of inventory, there's going to be someone that needs to solve some type of inventory problem.
Well, that's for me. I mean, I did different roles. I did salesman roles. I did the commercial department role. I did marketing. I was wondering what else I did. Oh, I was in charge of purchasing and in charge of menu development. But holistically, the biggest problem for the caterers is that they've got, like many businesses, or most businesses, they've got very small margins, and they need high volume, because when you've got small margins, you can need high volume. And this is where it's a very difficult situation with COVID. But in those days, we were selling hot meal, the entree, for 75 cents in 1989, 90. And you can't afford, you need to have 100% yield of what you take in and what you send out. You don't need any wastage in the inventory or bad packaging or somebody mishandling the box. So religiously, the caterers were hotels and restaurants talk about stock takes each month and they rely on the chef. For us, the stock take of the inventory was everything, because the margins were so small and the volumes were so high of meat and everything, from sodas to all the way through to toilet kits. So we had to really be sure. And if there was no discipline in the inventory and the stock taking, then our figures would be out. And the thing that we analyzed more than anything with low prices and high volume was our gross profit realizable every month, and the inventory was everything for that. So
how did you count? What did you use to count?
Well, exactly. So each head of an area, so the head chef got the hot kitchen, the cold kitchen guy. So all the kitchen would do their work. The stores had to do their work. And then we had guys, as they do in all these big flight kitchens, we used to call them the freezer men. And I'm not being gender bad here. It's not for everybody to spend your, like, maybe 6 hours of a shift inside a freezer at minus 18 degrees C. So these guys used to put on these huge suits and go in and count the stock. So we had the freezer guys, we had the store guys doing ambient, chilled. I mean, if you think about one of these big kitchens, you'd have, in those days, everybody had an orange juice couplet on the tray. So we'd have like, and in the US, the biggest one was made by, it used to come in frozen. Which is the company that makes the orange juice couplets in the US? It's probably not a big thing anymore, but in those days, it was huge. Every tray had an orange juice couplet. So we'd have pallets and pallets of them in the fridge, because we would go through so many a day. So you had to count those. You had to count boxes that were unopened. And the most important thing was the timing. Everyone had to count at the same time, and no new stock had to come in. And then the accountants, they had to look through the invoices so that you absolutely had a perfect stock take. And if you didn't, you'd see it in the figures.
And so, but when they had to stop, I guess when you had to count, you had to stop production, right? Everything had to stop. All hands on deck to stop production.
Yeah, absolutely. And they try and do it at night, but then in Manchester, where I'd worked, Manchester was 24 hours, because all the charter leisure flights are all going in the middle of the night, because they want cheap prices for tickets. For families, they have to be prepared to go at 2 a.m, because the aircraft's used. Some of the airlines had charter and schedules, so they would use the aircraft for schedule in the day for business people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Everybody had to do it at the same time, and they picked the most ideal time when there'd be the least amount of production throughout the building. But if you think about it, we didn't count the airline equipment. We had to do that as well, but that was a totally different exercise. We had everything that we bought. So we bought all the sodas. Right. Yeah, so we bought all the tea bags. We bought all the coffee pillow packs. We bought all the toilet rolls. So everything that we bought, we had to. Do you imagine? I mean, all of this. It's a huge, huge stock take in a building that's was about 60,000 square foot. You've got the mezzanine floor all full of stock. So it was a huge undertaking. So if we had the Counterlytics product, that would have saved so much time. And of course, we didn't have Excel spreadsheets then. So it all had to go onto, like an accountant's pad, and all be manually data entered. I mean, Lotus Notes didn't come until into the UK, I guess until the sort of late 80s, early 90s, maybe 93, 94. I can't remember when Lotus Notes came out, but it certainly wasn't around in my early days when I was working 89, 90, 91. So it was the inventory for commercial flight caterers, everything, because of the small margins.
Yeah. And so and you're right. And I know that is, like I said, one of the reasons we started the company, because we knew that inventory was such a big deal, and how can we help save money? Because there's so much money wrapped up in the inventory. But
yeah, and no one wants to do it. No one wants to do it. There's no glory. Where we always used to go, oh, what's this guy's job, your colleague's job in the airline? And they go, oh, he or she is involved in their responsibilities, airline equipment. And we used to go, oh my gosh, that's your job to be responsible for airline equipment. It was like you've been really bad in a previous life. So what did you do to get that job? I mean, it's a brutal job. So not many people in the public know, but in those days, on a 747, 50,000 catering items are loaded on the aircraft.
Wow.
So for an A380 today, it'll be 75. If they've got a very rich service, probably 100,000 items. So I don't mean 100,000 different, but 100,000 items, all packed and assembled and manipulated by human beings. There was only in those days 2 facilities worldwide where there was mechanization. British Airways had a long-haul facility at Heathrow, and I think one of the US carriers had one in whether it was Delta or United, I can't remember. I think that one of them had some automation. So, and everybody, as you guys know, everybody is pretty low paid. So, it's not an exciting job. You haven't got a professor of mathematics doing it.
Yeah, I got one question for you. How is it different from, what do you see, what similarities do you see from back then and the challenges that you see airlines with today?
Well, I think today, the airlines, today, to be brutally honest, there isn't the technical level of knowledge in the airlines today, and there isn't the technical level of knowledge with the caterers. So when I look at the guys I work with, if you stand back a bit, who were the great caterers in the world? And nobody knows this because no one's interested. I am, and maybe you are. So in the UK, it was Trust House 40, who we worked for, and they had big hotels worldwide. They had hotels in all over New York, West Coast, East Coast, at the George sang in Paris, and they had a big flight catering business that they built up. And then in America, the number one was Marriott. I mean, Marriott, they had rich prices, huge volumes, because everybody had on domestic flights. And a senior executive from Marriott told me about 10 years ago, you don't realize how many hotels we built on the back of our flight catering business.
Oh, wow.
They made so much money because there was less competition, prices were high. Most of the US carriers were making money. I know there were like Eastern and others would fall off. So Marriott were the great caterers. They learned and understood the business. It only really started properly in the late 50s, going into the 60s and 70s. It really wasn't a big business. And then the great ones in Europe were SAS Airline. They had, SAS had a great skill set of managers who built kitchens and did automation actually in Amsterdam in the late 80s, early 90s. So SAS were good. Trust House Forte in England, SAS in Europe, and Marriott in the States. They were the great caterers. If you said you worked for them, and they learned all of their techniques, but it was mind-blowingly difficult because everything was really paper-based. So today you've got Excel spreadsheets and others. Some of them have tried to put in SAP, but SAP just takes over your business. If you put SAP in a kitchen, the problem with SAP is it doesn't work recipe based. It's good for single SKUs. So one Coke can, one goes in, one goes out. It's okay. But once you're manipulating menus and making sauces and braising beef, SAP really struggles, and a lot of caterers have really struggled putting it in, really struggle. So, but today the difference is that the airlines don't have as much knowledge as they used to have, and the caterers don't. So the caterers sort of get by, and the airlines are never really sure on inventory stock take. Is this right? I have to believe the caterer. We don't have so many people. I'll tell you a story about Lufthansa. They had this guy, his name was Herb Ruprecht. He was like their doctor of aviation catering. He wrote 4 books on it, like pamphlet books. And his books were like amazing. And what he used to do, Herb Ruprecht, is he was in charge of everything of catering from Lufthansa. And he'd come to do an inventory check. And at Manchester, and they said to me, okay, you have to take Herb Ruprecht around the kitchen, and you have to take him to the Lufthansa cage, so where his equipment is, and then you need to take him on the mezzanine floor to see where his bulk equipment is out of the boxes. So this guy was like a guru, but I was junior. I didn't really know how important he was. I said, oh, hello, Mr. Ruprecht, and he'd come in from Germany for the day. And I said, would you have a coffee? I said, would you like to see your equipment, sir? And he said, no. And I said, sorry? He said, I'm sure my equipment, young man, is perfectly in order, and the inventory you've got for me is perfect. What I'd like to see is all the other airline cages to see, and then I'd like to look at my cage at the end. I went, oh my goodness. So he was like an old guru guy and knew everything. So those people don't really exist today. So it's difficult for the airlines to understand, am I getting the right inventory check from the caterer? Is it true? Do I need expense more capital and put more equipment in? I mean, you look at those carts. The carts there's 2 different types of carts. You've got the full and half carts now, but United, Piedmont, and ANA of Japan used to have carts with the metal pad inside that you didn't have to put the entree in the oven. It rested on the tray, and the pad would heat the entree up.
Okay.
So if you mislaid those carts, they were like 5 times the price because they had metal elements all the way down the cart. So if you mislaid those, it was a big drama for those airlines. If it went wrong, or one of the pads, the whole thing wouldn't work. So inventory was everything. But I'll tell you a story. We took Japanese Airlines off KLM.
I got one question about what you just said.
Yeah.
You said that now that the airlines don't have as much visibility or don't really know kind of what the caterers do, right? And so that's really in essence what we've seen.
Exactly.
That, you know, one hand doesn't, sometimes the airlines are just writing blank checks, right? I'm writing the check, but I don't have all the data to know that I'm forecasting a particular airline, a flight correctly, right? And that's what we see with analytics, and that's how we try to help. That's why we try to give that data. And
if it's a big airline, so you're talking like in the US, if it's United, if it's Delta, if it's British Airways, Air France, KLM, they're so big. They've got so many ports where they've got equipment and caterers that they pick up from. It's so complex that they can't even get their heads around it.
Right.
So it's really difficult. So you need somebody who's like a guru who really understands it. And those people don't exist because they'd go and work in a more interesting world and checking stuff. And that's what happened. So I'll give you an example. I was responsible for our Amsterdam business, and we won Japanese Airlines off KLM Catering. And we said to Japanese Airlines, and this is where the money and the cost of a venture comes in, we said to them, how many pallets of equipment will your caterer send us when you change caterer at the end of this month? And we said, oh, well, our last stock take says we've got there is 48 pallets of Japanese Airlines of our equipment in their facility. And they were doing 1 747 a day. So 1 747 a day. So we said, okay, we will price at that level that we will do a deal with you at say 48 pallets. Below that, we won't charge you for the storage because it was very competitive market, 6 caterers. But anything over 50 pallets, we'll charge you for. So guess what happened? The equipment started coming from KLM. KLM Kitchen was huge because they did JAL, they did Kenya Airways, and KLM. KLM's massive kitchen. And the pallets started coming, and we thought, oh, here we go. Here's the 48 pallets. And then over the next 3 weeks, pallets just kept on coming. And 150 pallets came for one flight a day. And KLM Catering had never told the truth to Japanese Airlines how much equipment they had, because they will have had it stored off in a separate warehouse, and they're too busy. And Japanese Airlines went absolutely crazy with them. You've deceived us. You've lied to us. We had 100 pallets of equipment that's not even on our inventory. And we said to them, we can't take it, because if we take it, we'll have to move some other equipment somewhere else, and we'll have to charge you for it. So there's in essence what happens with inventory.
Yeah, we've actually seen the same thing. And you're right, all the large airlines, it's very hard to manage, right? And we've seen where we've had conversations with airlines where they send a team of 40, 50 auditors to 2 stations and try to audit on both sides just to understand what's coming, what's going. We've seen when they try to shut down or like go to a 1 flight a day station, right? And say, hey, maybe we can understand that better. But I think what our approach has been with Countalytics is, let's start with your largest station, with your largest kitchen facility. Let's understand how one set of products work. For example, we might take your soda beverages or your pop beverages or your non-perishable items and set up a station to count those, right? And understand how that works at one type of inventory. And if you get that, you can take small pieces And
Yeah.
then you can do 2 types. Then you can do 3 types, right?
So
And
what would you start with on purely airline equipment? Let's say service. Which piece of airline equipment is the #1 item for wastage that disappears?
it's so
with quiz question for you.
Yeah, with equipment, what we've seen 2. We've seen plates. People don't know where plates are, and actually carts.
Okay.
Not knowing where the carts are, the carts themselves.
Yeah.
And on the food and beverage items, it's always liquor. Liquor is everybody wants the liquor in the U.S. anyway. What about you?
Well, I'll tell you, you're right on those, but the #1 item that because of its size is teaspoons. I mean, teaspoons is, so what the airlines have is, they have like a life cycle for rotating items.
Right.
So they'll put, let's say they say, I think if I remember, let's say plates, like full-size plates, first class, they say they last 35 rotations. So you're thinking, well, it's rubbish. They must be able to last long. Maybe they get chipped, something, mostly because they get chipped because they're China.
Mm-hmm.
But the one with the lowest is like teaspoons, is like lives 3 rotations. I mean, I'm slightly exaggerating, but it's not far off what it is. And so I remember British Airways in our London Gatwick kitchen, you know, they don't get put back on the tray well. They go in the cart, then the guys pull them out of the cart in the wash up, and then it's on the floor. So teaspoons is the one. But the one, the really interesting ones, which of course is very political, is you know, the consumption of alcohol is a big issue, because what was consumed, and do you have large bottles where you have a pouring system, or do you have a count item with what's called an 1875 bottle, and then you can count them as 1 SKU in, 1 SKU out? The other one is a real problem, which it's a slightly different subject, but it's related, is the duty-free carts, so the boutique cart. Now, a US carrier, which is either United or American, I won't tell you which one, on one route, they had about 10 routes into the Heathrow and about 17 flights a day. They both, in my time, they had both, this is a few years ago, a UANA, or about 17 a day. And they had shrinkage of $500,000 on items from the cart, but not on the 17 flights a day, but only on one route, and it was JFK.
Yeah.
So they would, the first stop on that is the inventory right? That's the first stop. So that's a total transparent. Have you, if you record it correctly on the delivery note, have you counted it correctly? And has it come back correctly? And what's the consumption? That's #1, but that's not where it was going. So we had the special branch police and people following the truck in an unmarked car out to the aircraft, people pretending they were doing maintenance at the aircraft, but actually checking to see when the cart goes in the stowage position, was somebody, you know, getting into the seat, because they're all sealed. They've got a seal on the cart, and then the flight attendants break it on. So all of those things. But there is amazing things we found out, that some of the flight attendants or somebody else, can be the cleaners, can be the ground handlers, they'd found a way of slightly opening the door of the car and getting their hands in, and all those things.
Yep.
So the shrinkage, wastage, and pilfering around aviation is huge. And it all goes back to the inventory. So in Manchester,
Exactly.
The biggest level of crime in the northwest of England was not murder, knife crime, drugs, or whatever. This was a few years ago. That the crime center for the northwest of England, it was Manchester Airport.
Really?
And all the goods are going in and out of Manchester Airport. Yeah, I mean, you had Pakistan Airlines that were moving, the crew were moving heroin from London to New York, and the American government said, we know you're doing it, we've just proved it. If it ever happens again, you will not, for 10 years, Pakistan Airlines be allowed to fly into the US. Wow. So the Lufthansa crews were smuggling smoked salmon from Scotland through Heathrow into Germany and selling it. So there we go.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that's one thing. We work with an airline who had not those specific problems, but the shrinkage and pilferage is huge. And so
Huge.
what we did to solve it is, as I said, as each station, we count everything as it goes on the plane, right?
Yeah.
Count everything
Yeah.
that goes off. And then with the Countalytics system, as it comes off the plane, we take a picture and we count everything
Yeah.
that comes off the plane. And then what that
Yeah.
does is say, I know what left, right? And then I have an understanding of what comes back. And so then you have certain points where you say, okay, well, after you get so much data, say you have 2 months of flight data, you can start pinpointing. Now I know that on this Atlanta to LA flight, when a particular person is flying, is the flight attendant or the crew on that flight, I see inventory numbers go down by 10% or 20%, right? And so what we try to do is provide that data that allows them to give transparency and have specific pinpoints about, I know what goes on the plane and I know exactly what comes off. And in the middle, we can work to figure that out. I think now the challenge is there's just no data, right? There's really not a lot of information.
Yeah. So how it works in Europe is different from the US. So it's strictly custom controlled. So, but don't forget that your baseline is that the majority of your flights, I don't know, 60% are into US, so they're domestic flights. But a lot of the flights in Europe, or let's say from the UK, they are 75% are going international. So so customs require you to complete an inventory check called it's a form that's been around for years called a C208. So you have to say, I put 25 sodas on, 25 tomato juices on, 36 Pepsis, blah, 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 blah. And then when it comes, and then it goes, that document goes on in triplicate and is put in what we call the bar, or in the trolley. Right. And then the crew have to sign it as received, supposedly check it when they receive it. They then do the walk around, with giving out the drinks and whatever they do. And then as they put the seatbelts on, and just before, the crew have to check and count every item in the galley and complete the 209 document, or I think it's the 209, 28, 209. They have to complete the document and then close the cart doors and seal it. And then the caterer takes it off and has to check and ratify that. But very difficult for the flight attendants to do that when it's a busy flight and the passengers are putting their hand up, can we go to the washroom, or the pilots want something. It's quite difficult for them to do an accurate inventory because they've got other things on their mind, getting all the passengers back in their seats. It's not the number one priority for them. Now, in the US, the flight attendants don't have to do that, do they?
No, the flight attendants, there's some policies internal policies that the flight attendants should do that.
Yeah, for sure.
But most of the time it is not mandated, right?
Well, you know what they say? They say, oh yeah, give me another crew member and I can count whatever you want. I'll count all the light bulbs in the aircraft. You want me to count the engines? I'll count that for you. But you cut us by one person, so what do you expect? Exactly. And don't forget, it's a hard discussion because they go, oh, and I'm not sure my union really wants me to do that because we didn't used to do it.
Exactly.
So the most compliant people for inventory, it's a terrible thing to say, this is ageism, which is illegal in the UK to talk about age, but the most compliant are the people who've joined the airline and they were young, because you tell them you've got to count the inventory in the cart before when it's 10,000 feet, you have to do that. That's your job. And they go, yes, sir. They do it because they're happy. They're young people. They've just started flying. They like it. If you tell the 50, 60-year-old, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, right, and they go, sorry, I need to check with my union. Same as in America.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same. And that's why we realize that, right? Because some airlines in the US are unionized, some are not. But regardless, I think you're still going to have, when you have an easy platform, which is what we try to offer, have something that's very easy to use. Everybody has a mobile device in their hand. They can pull it out, take a couple pictures of the inventory they want to count, and put it back. I think you're exactly right. The flight attendants have so much going on during the start and the end of the flight that the inventory is their last concern.
So what happens if they've got too much going on and they're working what we call a scam? Do you know what a scam is? You know, to make money and steal stock. What happens if they've got too much going on? In our experience with things like that, they say, oh, this system doesn't work. Analytics doesn't work. That doesn't work. My phone doesn't work because I don't have 4G. And so how do you have those issues?
Yeah. So we have those issues. And what we say is what happens is, even if you don't have Wi-Fi or you don't have a cell signal, what our application does, it will hold the picture that you take and it will cache that picture until you have a signal. So even if you don't have a signal, your phone has to have battery and all that kind of stuff, but the application will always take the picture. If you don't have Wi-Fi, it'll just hold on to that picture, hold on to those images and that data until you have a signal, and it will upload to our systems and process the picture. So yeah, we've had that issue because a lot of planes don't have Wi-Fi or the Wi-Fi is not working. I mean, the Wi-Fi in the aviation industry is a whole other issue.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi is not great in aviation, but it will be in time, but it's not great. The other question I don't know if you've come across this as well in terms of inventory. We found, because of the inventory checks, we found the crew are very entrepreneurial, and we found that it was a 2-cabin aircraft, and in the business cabin, the business passengers or whatever they were, elite passengers who paid more money, got a free meal, which is still happening. They got they got their cocktail, they got a drink with soda or wine or whatever. And what the airlines were doing is, in the back of the aircraft, they had the same inventory, but in the back of the aircraft, they were charging for it. So what did the crew do? They took all the stock out of business class, as much as they could get away with, and put it down the back and sold it and kept all the money. So that was, and if you don't have a robust inventory system, the best thing for that is if the crew did it at a smaller level, so no one really saw it. If they started doing, say, 8 bottles of champagne, the small champagne, and maybe 10 little miniature whiskeys, and over time it becomes a huge amount of money. If they go mad and do it, maybe it should have shows up. But that was one of the inventory problems that the airlines found. So one of the ways around it was not to sell the same product that was up front. The other way around it was to use which in the US I think it's pretty much like that now, that it's all credit cards. But in the early days in Europe, for retailing on board, it was really like 100% cash, and then it sort of the percentages have moved. The credit card systems got better, but after COVID, I reckon they'll just stop cash completely on the aircraft, which is great for shrinkage of money and reconciliation. And it stops the crew from taking cash and say, oh, I'll sell the business class free stuff down here.
Yeah, so that's true. So in the U.S., most all airlines are cashless now. But you're right, in other places in the world they are. But how we help with that is we have trend data, right? And so as I said before, if you know what goes on the plane and kind of knows what comes off the plane, you can also follow a specific crew, right? And you can say, hey, I see on this particular flight that your numbers are way lower than the other 5 flights that we've had today, right? And so you can start asking those questions when you have that data. And I think that's what Countalytics does. I know we're running close on time.
That's okay.
What are some of your clients now at a post-COVID world? I know things are a little crazier now, but what do you think your airline and caterers are going to be asking for post-COVID? How are they going to save money? And
on the basic level, they're still, it's early, they're still going through, it's not dissimilar to how the States is possibly going to map out as well, but in about a month's time, they're now going through, because they're so badly impacted, they're sort of looking out from the furlough period, and do we actually just let people go? And then the legislation in Europe is it's a bit technical, but it's between 30 and 45 days notice. What's the notice you have to give in the States? Is it very high fire in the States? Is it 1 day or?
Yeah, it really depends on the state, but
Sure.
and depends on the union and everything. But sometimes it can be immediate,
Yeah.
1 day, 2 weeks, but it depends on the
Yeah.
state.
Yeah, so it's 30 to 45 days. So they've started that process. We've got a conference call like this tomorrow with the number 2 low-cost airline in Europe, and their biggest issue they've got with their caterer supplier is they don't have any visibility on a daily basis and they're all retail on board. They're one class because they're a low-cost carrier, and although they're not always one class, but this one is, they don't have visibility. And they want to know what's selling, what's not selling,
Right.
because the revenues that they can make is, it's up to sort of $75 million net revenue from their retail on board program. So they want to know, okay, so if the San Miguel beer is not selling, should we put Heineken on? What's selling? And if we speak to Heineken, will they give us some listing fees?
Right.
So they need to know that, and they get the information at the end. They get a monthly inventory, then they get the reconciliation reports, and it just takes them too long. And the airlines feel the number one thing they want to do is get back control from their service provider. They're happy for the service provider to do all the ugly things of, responsible for stock and packing, but they want to have absolute visibility on the inventory, on their sales, and really what's working and not working. And they want it by route as well. So, and down to dovetail with what you're saying, they really would like it by team and by flight, which they can get. But the systems are getting more sophisticated, but they don't feel the caterer sharing it with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
in real time.
Yeah. And so I think that's why we started Countalytics, right? I think I saw the issue, how big of an issue inventory was. And I think the real issue is that airlines don't really air their dirty laundry, right? They're not really telling a lot of people outside, hey, we have a big issue with this inventory. Yeah. And so we actually started.
Well, they don't like, sorry to interrupt, they don't like to tell as well internally, right? Because somebody's saying, so why don't you know what's going on? And can you do your job? And, okay, so at a senior board level in airlines, it's the technical detail of how it happens is I wouldn't say intellectually it's technical, but it's quite involved. So they say to the senior board, it's not as simple as that. And they go, well, you should be just checking inventory. What's the problem? Right. So it's not a hush thing, but it's a half hush thing within aviation.
I agree with you. And we actually started, when we started Countalytics, we actually started the mobile application for the flight attendant, him or herself, to take the picture, right? To take the picture before the flight and take the picture after the flight. And that way you can actually tie the inventory count to a particular person, and to a flight, right? And so if we
you know what you find? You find bizarrely, it's the people who this is quite bizarre, and we found it. The people who are taking the inventory on the aircraft can't count. Ironically, they gave it to the crew member who just can't count. It's just bizarre. Like, why did you give it to Jane when you could have given it to Christine? Right. She can count. She got O-level maths. It's quite bizarre, as simplistic as that.
Well, what we found during a couple pilot tests, once they realize that somebody is taking a picture, all the inventory levels go up.
Exactly.
Right? All the inventory levels go up because they know, hey, somebody's watching. Now, most of the crew know that nobody's really watching, right?
Exactly.
And so once you implement a system that it's a simple system, it allows them to take a picture and it's consistent, inventory levels will increase.
I'll give you an example, right? Exactly what you said, David. So we bought a business in 2005. We bought a big business in Romania at Bucharest Airport. So half of it was aviation catering with a big facility, and the other half was food and beverage, restaurants, Burger Kings, etc. we bought that business, and then a month later I bought another one for $1, which was losing money. It was it was a small business. It was turning over about $1.5 million, and it was losing about $250,000. But for $1, we bought it.
Right.
It was linked to the Romania, and it was in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And we had 2 coffee shops, and we had a small flight catering business. And I said to the general manager, what do you think about your computer system for watching the stock and watching the people who are working for us, in putting the till and recording sales? And she said, oh, it's okay, it's not bad. And I said, does anybody know it's there? She said, oh, I think so. And I said, well, we've just put one in Romania, and it's improved the gross profit by 3%. And she said, really? And she said, but how expensive was the system? How expensive was the system? And I said, well, the one in Romania is going to pay for itself in 2 months, all the capital. And she said, really? And she said, but we haven't got that capital here. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'm going to sign it off, and we're going to buy it. And so what it was, this system is a bit like Counterlytics. It was so sophisticated. It on your computer, you would see everything that the person was putting in. So like 2 Big Macs, 2 Peroni beers, it would show that. And on the right-hand side, it would actually have a picture of them putting it in physically. So you'd see the data input. At the same page, you'd also see that person doing it. It was incredible. We paid for Ultra HD. And in Bulgaria, everybody, the gross profit went up about 5%. So there was clearly some staff shrinkage.
Right.
The staff were constantly worried about it. They also thought that the management could hear them talking through it. And we never said, no, we can't. So we were just it was fantastic for the inventory for us, great for the gross profit, took the shrinkage away, and it paid for itself. But it seemed like a lot of money at the time, but we went for it.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's how we try to set up our system. We say, hey, this system will pay for itself, because now, like you said, airlines don't have a lot of people who manage a lot of inventory just don't have the transparency, right? Yeah. It's the that transparency you have to understand, because if you can't answer the question, how much did you spend on inventory last month or last year?
They don't know.
If you can't answer that question, then you don't know what you should be spending on, right? And so you have to, one, have some kind of transparency into what your inventory levels are, or you're just throwing money out the window.
But when you talk to them, how many admit they've got a sort of problem that's sort of brushed under the carpet? Do they admit it?
They all admit it. They all admit it. I think that what they don't know is that number. They're like, hey, we don't know that number. We don't know what that number is. We try to get our hands around it. And so they will never, ever, ever know until they can rely on the person who's counting the inventory. They'll never know. They'll never know. And I think that's why you see a lot of airlines taking the job of the caterer back in-house, like getting rid of the caterers and say, bringing that back in-house so we have some visibility. And we've seen that in several projects that we worked on as well. They say, hey, we just don't have, you guys are not meeting KPIs. You're not doing a good job. So we're going to bring this back in-house and try it ourselves, right? We don't know what we don't know at this point. We want to learn.
Yeah. So, but the airlines, all they've got to do is be careful that they pick the bit they want. They don't want to take it all back in-house, because once they insource their aviation catering, they then get all the problems that they don't know about. So you want to be careful. Don't be careful what you wish for, because then you suddenly get, whoa, all over to you, baby. That's it. I mean, I used to say to the airlines, if you beat us up too much, you'll end up doing your own catering. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, you can keep beating us on you want $1 meal. You want $1 meal, but it costs us 98 cents, and there's no margin for us. So you keep beating us up much further. I hope you've got your hairnet and your jacket on, because you'll be in that kitchen.
Well, Robert, on that note, man, this has been a real pleasure. I thank you so much for your time.
No,
so much wisdom in the airline and catering.
I'm not sure about that.
No, we're gonna have to talk. We're gonna have to talk again because I know.
It'd be lovely.
Yeah, I wanna still learn more. I know the Hayward Partnership has a white paper that they
Yeah,
just
we do.
released. And so we're gonna have to after when that's officially released and publicized, we'll definitely have to jump on again.
Sure.
Maybe you and Lance Hayward as well to talk through that as well.
Well, we'd love to talk to you again, and then I wish you well on selling Canalits because I think it's a great product.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Brian, as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye, guys.